I was staring out my kitchen window at the mountain of snow in my driveway when I saw Brenda Morrison's silver Lexus pull up to the curb. And I knew my peaceful Sunday morning in Rochester, Minnesota, was about to turn into a nightmare. The blizzard that had hit our neighborhood 3 days earlier was one for the record books, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the Twin Cities metro area. I had spent the better part of Thursday and Friday clearing my driveway with my snowblower, piling the white stuff in a neat mound along the edge of my property. It was a beast of a pile, sure, maybe 8 feet high and stretching about 15 feet along the curb, but it was on my property. I had checked, twice. The property line ran right along the sidewalk edge, and my snow pile was a good foot onto my side of that line. Brenda stepped out of her car wearing a puffy white coat that made her look like the Michelin Man. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that seemed to pull her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She was the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, a position she took so seriously you would think she was running a small country rather than a subdivision of 63 homes. I watched as she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my snow pile. My wife Sarah had left that morning to visit her sister in Duluth for the week, which meant I was on my own to deal with whatever fresh hell Brenda was cooking up. I opened the front door before she could ring the bell. The cold January air hit me like a slap. "Morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She looked up from her phone, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Adam, we need to talk about this snow situation." "What snow situation?" I cleared my driveway. "This pile is a safety hazard and an eyesore." Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that homeowners must maintain the aesthetic integrity of their property and the surrounding area. I felt my jaw tighten. "It's snow, Brenda, from a blizzard. Where exactly did you expect me to put it? That's not my problem." "The bylaws are clear. This needs to be removed by end of business tomorrow, or you'll be facing a fine. It's going to melt in a few weeks when the temperature rises." "End of business tomorrow, Adam. That's 5 p.m. She turned on her heel and marched back to her Lexus, her boots crunching in the snow. I stood there in the doorway, watching her drive away, feeling my blood pressure rise. This was typical Brenda. Last summer, she had threatened to fine my neighbor Mike Chen because his grass was half an inch too long during his family vacation. The summer before that, she had sent a formal complaint to the Johnsons about their kids' basketball hoop being 3 inches over the property line into the common area. I went back inside and called my buddy Derek, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 5 years before selling his house and moving to a neighborhood without an HOA. "She wants you to remove 2 feet of snow in January. In Minnesota." Derek's laugh came through the phone. "Where does she think it's going to go?" "That's what I said. I can't exactly haul it to Mexico." "You know what you need to do? Check every single thing that woman does. I guarantee she's violating something. Nobody who's that obsessed with rules follows all of them themselves." After I hung up, I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon reviewing the HOA bylaws, all 47 pages of dense, ridiculous text. Section 12.4, which Brenda had cited, was vague enough to be essentially meaningless. It could be interpreted to mean anything from "don't paint your house neon pink" to "every blade of grass must be exactly 2.5 inches tall." Monday morning arrived with temperatures hovering around 15 degrees. I had to be at work by 8, so I left the house at 7:30, the snow pile still sitting exactly where it had been. As I drove past it, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. About 30 feet down from my property, right in front of the Patterson house, Someone had parked a dark blue Honda Accord. It was sitting close to the curb, and there was something red barely visible behind it. I slowed down but didn't stop. I was already running late for a meeting with a client about their tax returns. I owned a small accounting firm in downtown Rochester, and January through April were my busy months. The day at work was long and tedious, filled with spreadsheets and receipts and clients who thought that keeping their financial records in a shoebox was an acceptable filing system. By the time I got home at 6:30, it was dark and freezing. I pulled into my driveway and noticed a piece of paper tucked into my front door. The notice was printed on HOA letterhead and signed by Brenda. It informed me that I had failed to comply with the deadline for removing the snow pile and was hereby assessed a fine of $100. Additionally, if the pile was not removed within 48 hours, I would be fined an additional $100 per day until compliance was achieved. I crumpled the paper in my fist. $100 for snow in winter in Minnesota. I took a picture of the notice and texted it to Derek. His response came back immediately. "That's insane. Fight it." I went inside and drafted an email to Brenda, being as professional as I could manage while also pointing out that her interpretation of Section 12.4 was unreasonable and that the snow would melt naturally within weeks. I explained that I had nowhere to move it to, and that hiring someone to haul it away would cost hundreds of dollars for a problem that would resolve itself with time. Her response came at 9 p.m. "The fine stands. The bylaws are clear. If you wish to dispute this, you may present your case at the next HOA board meeting on February 15th. February 15th was 3.5 weeks away. At $100 per day, that would be over $2,000 in fines. I called Sarah in Duluth. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear her sister's kids yelling in the background. "Brenda is fining us for the snow pile," I said. "You're kidding. $100 a day until I remove it. She says I have to wait until mid-February to dispute it." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Can you move the snow somewhere else on the property? It's a 40 by 60 lot, Sarah. It's not exactly sprawling, and most of the yard is buried under 2 feet of snow already. I had to put it somewhere." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I'm not paying her $2,000 for snow." Tuesday morning, I woke up with a plan. If Brenda wanted to play by the rules, I would play by them too. I took the day off work, telling my assistant to reschedule my appointments, and I spent the morning walking through Meadowbrook Estates with a clipboard and a camera. Derek's advice kept running through my mind. Find something she's violating. I walked past every house in the subdivision, taking notes. The Hendersons had a small decorative fence that looked like it might extend slightly beyond their property line into the common area. The Ramirez house had holiday lights still up, which might violate the rule about seasonal decorations being removed within 2 weeks of the holiday. I was reaching, and I knew it. Then I walked past the Patterson house again, where that blue Honda was still parked in the same spot. In daylight, I could see clearly what I had only glimpsed the evening before. The car was parked directly in front of a fire hydrant, blocking it almost completely. The hydrant was barely visible behind the vehicle's rear bumper. I took several pictures from different angles. Then I checked the registration sticker on the license plate. The car belonged to someone with the last name Morrison, Brenda's last name. I felt a surge of satisfaction. I walked around to get a better view, and noticed that Brenda's car had been parked there for at least 2 days based on the snow patterns around the tires. The Pattersons were an elderly couple who spent winters in Arizona, which was probably why nobody had complained about the car blocking their view. I drove home and looked up the city ordinances for Rochester. Section 47-12 was clear. No parking within 15 feet of a fire hydrant. Violation was subject to a fine of $150 plus potential towing. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she would send an officer to check it out. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in my kitchen when I saw a Rochester Police Department squad car pull onto our street. The officer got out and walked over to the blue Honda. He spent a few minutes examining the car and the hydrant, taking measurements with what looked like a measuring tape. Then he pulled out a ticket book and started writing. I grabbed my coat and walked outside, trying to look casual. The officer was a tall guy, probably in his mid-30s, with a name tag that read Officer Patterson. "Afternoon," I said as I approached. "Afternoon, you call this in?" "I did." "That's been parked there for at least 2 days. Officer Patterson nodded. "It's definitely in violation. Rear bumper is about 3 feet from the hydrant. Thanks for reporting it. People don't realize how important it is to keep these clear." "What happens now?" "I'm issuing a citation. If it's not moved within 24 hours, we'll tow it." He tore the ticket off and placed it under the windshield wiper. "You live around here?" "Right there." I pointed to my house. He glanced over and his eyes landed on my snow pile. "That's quite a pile." My stomach dropped. "Yeah, had to put the snow somewhere after the blizzard." "Tell me about it. My driveway looks the same." He smiled and walked back to his squad car. I felt a wave of relief. The officer didn't care about my snow pile because it was normal. It was what people did after a blizzard. I went back inside and waited. At around 3 p.m., I saw Brenda's Lexus pull up near the Honda. She got out, saw the ticket, and even from my window I could see her face turn red. She looked around, probably trying to figure out who had called it in, then got into the Honda and drove away. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I opened it. Brenda stood on my porch, the parking ticket clutched in her hand, her face still flushed with anger. "Did you call the police on my car?" "I reported a vehicle blocking a fire hydrant, which is illegal." "That's my son's car. He's staying with me while his apartment is being renovated. You had no right." "Actually, I had every right. It's a safety violation. Fire trucks need access to hydrants." "This is harassment, Adam. I could have you brought up before the board." I felt my patience snap. "You're fining me $100 a day for a pile of snow from a blizzard, and you're calling me a harasser. That's rich, Brenda. The snow pile is a violation of the bylaws, and blocking a fire hydrant is a violation of city law which trumps HOA bylaws. You got a $150 ticket. Mine is $100 a day, so let's call it even. Drop my fine and I won't mention your parking violation at the next board meeting." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering a reasonable solution. The fine stands. And if you continue to harass me, I'll get a restraining order." She turned and stormed back to her car. I closed the door and leaned against it. This was escalating faster than I had expected. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board secretary, a woman named Patricia Woods who lived 3 streets over. The email informed me that my fine had been increased to $200 per day due to continued non-compliance and hostile behavior toward board members. I stared at the email in disbelief. $200 a day, that was $6,000 a month. For snow, I called Derek again. She doubled the fine. "On what grounds?" She says I was hostile. "Adam, you need to lawyer up. This is insane." "I'm not paying a lawyer hundreds of dollars to fight about snow. You're going to pay thousands in fines instead." He had a point. Wednesday morning, I drove to a law office on South Broadway that specialized in property disputes. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Catherine Wells, Listen to my story while taking notes. HOA disputes are tricky, she said when I finished. The bylaws are essentially a contract that you agreed to when you bought the house, but they have to be enforced reasonably. Fining you $200 a day for snow accumulation from a natural weather event is probably not reasonable. Probably. I'd need to review the full bylaws and the context, but based on what you're telling me, you have a good case. The problem is, fighting it will cost you. My retainer is $1,500, and that would cover the initial filing and correspondence. If it goes to court, you're looking at several thousand more. I thanked her and left. $1,500 just to start. I was stuck between paying Brenda or paying lawyers. I spent Wednesday afternoon doing something I had never done before. I drove to City Hall and requested copies of all permits and variances filed for properties in Meadowbrook Estates over the past 3 years. The clerk, a bored-looking guy in his 20s, told me it would take a few hours to pull the records. I killed time at a coffee shop, working on my laptop and trying not to think about the mounting fines. At 4 p.m., I went back to City Hall and picked up a thick folder of documents. Back at home, I spread the papers across my dining room table and started reading. Most of it was routine stuff. Fence permits, shed permits, a few requests for variances to build decks or additions. Then I found something interesting. Brenda Morrison had filed for a permit to build a storage shed in her backyard 18 months ago. The permit had been approved for a 10 by 12 shed, to be placed at least 5 feet from the property line per city ordinance. I had walked past Brenda's house during my survey of the neighborhood. Her shed was definitely larger than 10 by 12. It looked closer to 12 by 16. I grabbed my camera and drove to Brenda's house. She wasn't home. I walked around to the back, staying on the public easement, and took several photos of the shed. Then I measured it as best I could from the property line. 12 by 16, just as I thought, and it was only about 3 feet from the property line, not 5. Brenda had built a shed that violated both her permit specifications and the city setback requirements. I drove back to City Hall and spoke to someone in the building inspection department. The inspector, a middle-aged man named Ron, looked at my photos and the permit records. "Yeah, that's not in compliance," he said. "We'll need to send someone out to verify and issue a notice of violation." "What happens then?" "She'll have to either get a variance approved retroactively, which is tough, or modify the shed to meet the requirements. If she doesn't comply, she could face fines and a lien on the property." "How long does that process take?" "We'll try to get someone out there within a week. Then she'll have 30 days to come into compliance." I left City Hall feeling like I had finally gained some leverage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about showing Brenda that her obsession with enforcing petty rules could cut both ways. Thursday morning, I got another email from Patricia Woods. The HOA board was requesting a meeting with me to discuss ongoing violations and find a path toward compliance. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10 a.m. at Brenda's house. I showed up exactly on time. Brenda answered the door wearing a pressed white blouse and black slacks, looking like she was about to chair a corporate board meeting instead of a neighborhood squabble session. The meeting took place in her living room, which was decorated in various shades of beige and cream, with not a single item out of place. Besides Brenda, there were 2 other board members present. Patricia Woods, the secretary, was a thin woman in her 60s with gray hair and a nervous smile. The treasurer, a man named Gary Hunt, was probably 50, balding, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. "Thank you for coming, Adam," Brenda said, gesturing to a chair. "We wanted to discuss a resolution to this situation." I sat down. "I'm listening." Patricia pulled out a folder. We've reviewed your account and you currently owe $800 in fines. That's 4 days at $200 per day. For a pile of snow. Gary cleared his throat. The bylaws are in place to maintain property values for all residents, Adam. We need everyone to comply. Show me one other person who's been fined for snow accumulation after a blizzard. Brenda leaned forward. That's not relevant. Your property is in violation. And yours isn't. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos of her shed. Your storage shed violates both your building permit and city setback requirements. I've already filed a complaint with the building inspector's office. They'll be out to verify it early next week. The room went silent. Patricia and Gary both looked at Brenda, who had gone very pale. That's completely different, Brenda finally said. Is it? You're enforcing rules selectively. That's the definition of harassment. Gary shifted uncomfortably. Adam, maybe we can find a compromise here. Here's my compromise. Drop all the fines for the snow pile, and I'll drop my complaint about the shed. We both walk away. Brenda stood up. Absolutely not. The fines are legitimate. Then I guess we'll both be dealing with inspectors and lawyers. I stood up and walked out. As I got into my car, I could see through the window that the 3 board members were having a heated discussion. Patricia looked upset, and Gary kept shaking his head. Saturday afternoon, I got a phone call from an unknown number. It was Gary Hunt. Adam, I want to apologize for how this has been handled, he said. I was reviewing the bylaws after our meeting, and honestly, I don't think Section 12.4 applies to temporary snow accumulation. It's meant to address things like abandoned vehicles or permanent structures that are eyesores. Then why are you voting to fine me? Brenda is very convincing, and she's been board president for 4 years. She usually knows what she's doing. Usually, Gary sighed. Look, I'm going to vote to rescind the fines at the February meeting. Patricia is leaning that way too, but I wanted you to know that not everyone on the board thinks this is appropriate. I appreciate that, Gary. Just keep that snow pile cleaned up once it starts melting, okay? Don't give her any more ammunition. After I hung up, I felt a bit better. At least 2 of the 3 board members were reasonable. But I still had to wait until February 15th to get the fines officially dropped, and that was assuming Brenda didn't find some way to override them. The following Tuesday, I was at work when I got a call from a number with a Rochester area code. Mr. Xander, this is Ron from City Building Inspection. I'm at the Morrison property right now, and I wanted to let you know that we've verified the violation. The shed is oversized and doesn't meet setback requirements. What happens next? We're issuing a notice of violation. Mrs. Morrison has 30 days to either obtain a variance or bring the structure into compliance. She wasn't home when I arrived, so I'm leaving the notice on her door. I thanked him and hung up. Part of me felt guilty about reporting Brenda's shed, but a larger part of me felt satisfied that she was finally facing consequences for her own violations. That evening, my phone rang. It was Brenda, and she was furious. You had my shed reported. How dare you? You had my snow pile reported. Same thing. A shed is permanent. Your snow will melt, so modify your shed. Problem solved. This is going to cost me thousands of dollars, and your fines were going to cost me thousands of dollars. Seems fair to me. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next few days were quiet. The snow pile sat in my driveway, slowly compacting and getting a bit crusty from the freeze-thaw cycles. The temperature had risen to the mid-30s during the afternoons, and each day a little bit of the pile melted away. Then, on Friday evening, I came home to find a police cruiser parked in front of my house. My heart sank. Had Brenda actually called the cops about the snow, I parked in my driveway and got out. The officer standing on my porch was the same one who had ticketed Brenda's car the previous week. "Officer Patterson." "Evening, officer," I said. "Is there a problem, Mr. Xander? I need to talk to you about a complaint we received." My stomach dropped. "Let me guess. Brenda Morrison." He smiled slightly. "Actually, yes. She called the station this afternoon claiming that your snow pile is blocking the sidewalk and creating a public safety hazard." "It's not blocking the sidewalk. Want to walk over and check?" We walked to the snow pile together. The sidewalk, which I had shoveled clear after the blizzard, ran right along the edge of my property. The snow pile was entirely on my lawn, about a foot away from the sidewalk edge. Officer Patterson pulled out a measuring tape and checked the clearance. Sidewalk is completely clear. At least 4 feet of walking space. So no violation. No violation of city ordinance. He paused. Mrs. Morrison also mentioned something about HOA fines and harassment. I'm not sure what that's about, but I want to be clear that HOA disputes are civil matters. We don't get involved unless there's a criminal complaint. Understood? Between you and me." He lowered his voice. "Mrs. Morrison has called us about neighbor disputes at least a dozen times in the past 2 years. None of them have resulted in any action on our part. You're not doing anything wrong here." After Officer Patterson left, I sat in my living room feeling exhausted. This situation had consumed nearly 2 weeks of my life, and it showed no signs of ending. The snow pile was slowly melting, but not fast enough. At this rate, it would be mid-February before it was gone, which meant dealing with Brenda's harassment for at least another 3 weeks. I decided to take a different approach. The next morning, I called a landscaping company that advertised snow removal services. The owner, a gruff-sounding guy named Pete, answered on the 3rd ring. "I need a snow pile moved," I said. "About 8 feet high, maybe 6 cubic yards of snow." "Where do you want it moved to?" That was the problem. "I was hoping you had suggestions," Pete laughed. "In January. There's nowhere to put it except someone else's property. Best I can do is spread it around your yard, but that's just moving the problem." I thanked him and hung up. Dead end. Sunday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table working on tax returns when my phone rang. It was Patricia Woods from the HOA board. "Adam, I wanted to give you a heads up. Brenda is planning to file a formal complaint against you at the February meeting for harassment and intimidation." "Intimidation?" "She claims you threatened her during the meeting at her house, and that reporting her shed was an act of retaliation meant to intimidate her into dropping the fines." "That's insane. I offered a compromise and she refused." "I know. Gary and I both know. But she's still the board president, and she has a lot of influence with some of the other homeowners. I wanted you to know what you're walking into." "Is there any way to move up the meeting date?" "Not really. The bylaws require 30 days' notice for any board meeting that involves disciplinary action." After we hung up, I felt a surge of anger. Brenda was trying to paint me as the villain in a situation she had created. I had done nothing wrong except defend myself against her ridiculous fines. I spent the rest of Sunday researching HOA law in Minnesota. What I found was both encouraging and depressing. Minnesota courts generally sided with homeowners in disputes over unreasonable fines, but the process of fighting HOA actions in court was expensive and time-consuming. Several cases had dragged on for years. Monday morning, I was getting ready for work when I noticed something strange. The snow pile in my driveway was smaller, noticeably smaller. I walked outside and saw that a good portion of the top had been removed. There were shovel marks in the snow and a trail of scattered snow leading down the sidewalk. Someone had been digging into my snow pile. I walked around the property, trying to figure out what had happened. Then I noticed it. About 50 feet down the street, in front of the empty Patterson house, there was a fresh pile of snow right in front of the fire hydrant. The same fire hydrant that Brenda's son's car had been blocking. Someone had deliberately moved snow from my pile to block the fire hydrant. I took photos from every angle, then called the non-emergency police line again. The dispatcher said she would send an officer. This time, it was a different officer, a woman named Officer Martinez. She examined the snow pile in front of the hydrant and took her own photos. Any idea who did this? She asked. No, but someone removed snow from my pile overnight and moved it here. I'm in a dispute with my HOA president, and I previously reported her car for blocking this same hydrant. Officer Martinez looked at me thoughtfully. You think she's retaliating? I don't know. But it's suspicious. I'll file a report. If you have any security cameras or if any of your neighbors do, that footage might be helpful. I didn't have cameras, but my neighbor Mike Chen did. He had installed a doorbell camera 6 months earlier after someone stole a package from his porch. I walked over and knocked on Mike's door. He answered in sweatpants and a Minnesota Vikings jersey. Adam, what's up? Do you still have that doorbell camera? Yeah, why? I explained the situation with the snow pile. Mike pulled out his phone and accessed the camera's app. We scrubbed through the footage from the previous night. At around 2 a.m., a figure in a dark coat appeared on the edge of the frame. The person was wheeling a large plastic sled loaded with snow. They made 3 trips, each time dumping snow in front of the fire hydrant. Can you see who it is? I asked. Mike zoomed in as much as the camera allowed, but the quality wasn't great in the dark. It's definitely a woman. Average height, can't make out the face. Can you send me this footage? Sure, but is this really worth pursuing? It's just snow. It's about blocking a fire hydrant. That's a safety issue. Mike forwarded me the video clips. I sent them to my phone and then forwarded them to Officer Martinez with a note explaining what they showed. Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from Officer Martinez. Mr. Xander, I reviewed the footage you sent. We can't identify the person from the video, but we're going to investigate further. In the meantime, the snow has been cleared from in front of the hydrant by the City Public Works Department. What happens next? If we can identify who did it, they could face charges for obstruction and potentially false reporting if they try to blame it on you. Wednesday evening, I was making dinner when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gary Hunt standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. Gary, what can I do for you? Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something. I let him in and offered him coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. I resigned from the HOA board this afternoon, Gary said. I blinked. Why? Because Brenda Morrison moved snow from your property to block that fire hydrant, and she tried to get me and Patricia to say we saw you do it. I felt my mouth go dry. She admitted to moving the snow, not directly, but she let it slip during a phone call with Patricia. She said something about teaching you a lesson about reporting violations. Patricia told me and I confronted Brenda. She denied it, but it was obvious she was lying. Did you tell the police? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. If I report this, it's going to blow up the whole HOA. Brenda will lose her position and will probably have to hold emergency elections for new board members. Gary, she tried to frame me for a crime. That's not just an HOA issue. That's a police matter. He nodded slowly. I know. I just wanted you to hear it from me first. I'm going to the police tomorrow morning. After Gary left, I called Officer Martinez and told her what I had learned. She asked me to have Gary come to the station to give a formal statement. Thursday morning, Gary went to the Rochester Police Department and told them everything. By Thursday afternoon, 2 officers showed up at Brenda Morrison's house. I wasn't there, but Mike Chen witnessed it and filled me in later. Brenda answered the door, and the officers spoke with her for about 20 minutes. Then they asked her to come to the station for further questioning. She went willingly, but according to Mike, she looked shaken. Friday morning, I got a call from Patricia Woods. She was crying. "Adam, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Brenda would do something like this. The board is holding an emergency meeting tonight to remove her as president." "What's going to happen to her?" "I don't know. The police are still investigating. But even if she's not charged with anything, she can't stay on the board after this." The emergency HOA board meeting was held Friday evening at the community clubhouse. I attended, along with about 30 other residents who had heard about the drama and wanted to see what happened. Brenda showed up looking tired and angry. She sat alone in the back row. Patricia, who was running the meeting as secretary, called it to order. "We're here to discuss serious allegations against our board president, Brenda Morrison. These allegations include abuse of power, harassment of a homeowner, and potential criminal activity. The board has reviewed the evidence and interviewed multiple parties. We're now voting on whether to remove Mrs. Morrison from her position as president and from the board entirely." A homeowner named Susan raised her hand. "What exactly did she do?" Patricia explained the situation, from the initial fines against me for the snow pile to Brenda moving snow to block the fire hydrant and trying to frame me for it. By the time she finished, the room was buzzing with shocked conversations. Another homeowner, an older man named Ted, stood up. "Brenda, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Brenda stood, her face flushed. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by Adam Xander because he didn't want to follow the rules. Everything I did was within my authority as board president, including moving snow to block a fire hydrant." Ted asked. "I didn't do that. There's no proof." Gary Hunt stood up. "Brenda, I was there when you told Patricia about teaching Adam a lesson. Stop lying." Brenda sat down and didn't say anything else. The vote was unanimous. Brenda Morrison was removed from the HOA board, effective immediately. Patricia was named interim president until proper elections could be held in March. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Apparently, Brenda had been terrorizing people with petty fines and complaints for years, but nobody wanted to make waves. Monday morning, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Mr. Xander, I wanted to update you. We're charging Mrs. Morrison with obstruction and filing a false report. She'll have to appear in court next month." "What kind of penalties is she looking at?" "For first-time offenses, probably a fine and community service. But it'll be on her record." Tuesday, I received a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by Patricia Woods, stating that all fines against my property had been rescinded and that I would receive a written apology. The letter also outlined new procedures for how fines would be assessed in the future, including requirements for photographic evidence and opportunities for homeowners to dispute fines before they were imposed. The snow pile in my driveway continued to melt. By mid-February, it was down to about 4 feet high. By early March, it was mostly gone, just a small mound of dirty, compacted snow that looked like every other remnant pile in the neighborhood. Brenda Morrison pleaded guilty to obstruction in late February. She was sentenced to 40 hours of community service and a $500 fine. She also had to pay restitution to the city for the cost of clearing the snow from the fire hydrant. According to neighborhood gossip, she put her house on the market in March and moved to a different subdivision in southwest Rochester. The HOA held elections in March, and Patricia Woods was elected president. Gary Hunt returned to the board as treasurer, and a new slate of more reasonable people filled the other positions. One of their first acts was to revise Section 12.4 of the bylaws to clarify that it didn't apply to temporary conditions like snow accumulation from storms. Sarah came home from her sister's place in early February, right in the middle of the drama. I gave her a full rundown of everything that had happened. "I leave you alone for 2 weeks and you start a war with the HOA," she said, but she was smiling. "I didn't start it, I just finished it." In April, long after the snow had melted and the grass was starting to turn green again, I got an unexpected visitor. It was Officer Patterson, the cop who had first ticketed Brenda's car. "Mr. Xander, I wanted to stop by and thank you," he said. "Thank me for what?" "For reporting that blocked hydrant. About a week after we sighted Mrs. Morrison's car, we had a house fire 2 blocks over. The crew needed quick access to that hydrant. If it had been blocked, they might not have been able to save the house." I hadn't thought about it that way. The fire hydrant report had felt like petty retaliation at the time, but it turned out to be important. I'm glad I called it in then. "So am I. Take care, Mr. Xander." As I watched Officer Patterson drive away, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. What started as a simple snow pile had turned into an HOA president getting criminal charges and a complete overhaul of how the neighborhood was managed. Part of me felt guilty about how far things had escalated. But a larger part of me felt satisfied that someone who had been abusing her power for years had finally faced consequences. Brenda had created the situation by being unreasonable and vindictive. I had just refused to be bullied. The following week, I ran into Gary Hunt at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes about the new board and how much better things were running. "You know what the ironic thing is?" Gary said. "That shed Brenda built. The city made her tear it down. She couldn't get a variance approved and modifying it would have cost more than just removing it." "When did that happen?" "Late March, right before she moved. She had to hire a contractor to demolish it and haul it away. Cost her about $3,000. I tried not to smile, but I couldn't help it. $3,000. Almost exactly what she would have fined me if I had let the snow pile fines accumulate until the February meeting." "That's karma for you," I said. "Sure is." That evening, I sat on my back deck with Sarah, drinking beer and watching the sunset. The weather was warming up, and the neighborhood was coming back to life after the long winter. Kids were riding bikes in the street, and someone a few houses down was grilling burgers. "Are you going to run for the HOA board?" Sarah asked. "Absolutely not. I've had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime." "Good. Because I don't want to deal with you becoming the next Brenda Morrison." I laughed. "I think we're safe on that front." But the truth was, I did plan to stay more involved in HOA affairs going forward. Not as a board member, but as an engaged homeowner who paid attention to what was happening and spoke up when things went wrong. The Brenda Morrison situation had taught me that HOAs only become tyrannical when good people stay silent. In May, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood block party to kick off the summer. It was the first social event the HOA had sponsored in years, and almost everyone showed up. There were grills and lawn games and a bouncy house for the kids. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, when Patricia Woods came over. "Adam, I just wanted to thank you again for standing up to Brenda. A lot of people were frustrated with how she ran things, but nobody had the courage to challenge her. I didn't really have a choice. She came after me first. Still, things are so much better now. People actually want to be involved in the HOA again." She was right. The attendance at board meetings had tripled since Brenda left. People felt like they had a voice again, like the HOA was working for them instead of against them. As I stood there flipping burgers and watching my neighbors laugh and talk, I realized something important. Community isn't about rules and fines and enforcement. It's about people treating each other with respect and common sense. Brenda had forgotten that, and it cost her everything. The sun set over Meadowbrook Estates, and the block party continued into the evening. Kids chased each other across lawns while adults sat in lawn chairs talking about nothing important. It was exactly what a neighborhood should be. And somewhere across town, in a different subdivision, Brenda Morrison was probably measuring someone's grass and drafting violation notices. Some people never learn, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I had won my war with the HOA, not by being the biggest bully, but by standing up for what was right and refusing to back down. And in the process, I had helped make my neighborhood a better place to live. The snow pile was long gone, melted into the ground and forgotten. But the lessons it taught me about power, principles, and community would last a lot longer than any Minnesota winter.